Damn. Mike, welcome everybody. Law and Legitimacy. Let me know next time you're going to change the intro music. I was getting ready to get up on my seat and on my desk and start dancing, but we didn't have the wide angle lens and I wasn't sure people could cope with it. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy, everyone. I don't want to waste time this morning because we've got a very valuable guest, one of my favorite human beings. Ron, it's not you. It's not you. We're going to have, Shmuley Hecht on here. Where is he? How did we end up with Coleman? All right, well, let's make do with what
Iceberg,
we've got.
Greenberg.
Yeah, we've got Ron. And the topic today is anti-Semitism. So we wanted to pick our favorite, the Jew we hate most, Ron Coleman, so that we could ask him, what's the matter with Jew? Ron,
if you knew as many Jews as I do, you would be amazed that I'm not an anti-Semite.
Well, I hate everyone, and that includes the Jews. So, but
there you go. That's right.
But
in fact, it would be discrimination not to hate the Jews.
Well, it would be because after all men are despicable and Jews are, but they're not quite men. So I guess they can't be fully despicable. But
Untermen are even more. All right.
Yeah. Dawn's already ingratiating herself to you. She says, I love Ron. He's tough, but instills serenity. So there's your morning compliment, Ron.
So, she's a pickleball player and retired sociologist. She's on the make. You might want to check her contraception status before the two of you meet because we've got enough Jews in the world, Ron, even half Jews. Good morning, Dawn. Anti-Semitism's in the news these days, and so is the latest conflict in Israel. Ron, thank you for coming on. It's a serious topic, and one of the reasons I wanted you on is because I still don't get it. I've got some guy all over me on Twitter, and the Jews, they own everything. I defy you to tell me an industry they don't control. And I look at that text message, and some part of me wants to just ignore it. And I'm afraid to ignore it because ignoring fungus in the bathroom just encourages it to grow. And so I basically write back and I said, who are they? What are you talking about? What industries? The very fact, forming the question in that way suggests an element of resentment that I don't understand. See, I told you you couldn't respond to my question. They own everything. And I don't even know what the question means, Ron. And you're obviously Jewish. I mean, that's why you got the skull cap on, unless, of course, you're worried about skin cancer in the dome of your head.
Because I would definitely, you would never guess in my case if it weren't for the skull cap.
No, I mean, I never would.
A lady came up to me in the airport last time I was traveling, which these days is not that long ago. And she just, a regular, person of power, and came up to me and just said to me, God bless you. In other words, she wanted to extend her support and her affection towards the Jewish people. And I, as a skull cap wearer, I'm a representative, so, and it was very touching. But I realized, really, I'm not exactly the guy in the, in the cartoon, but I'm pretty close. Okay. And if I weren't wearing the skull cap, it would not be as obvious, but you couldn't come up to me and say, hey, you look like a Jew. So, but you know what, you almost got it, because when you said, because there's something else we have to unpack in that formulation. The Jews own all the things. There's really no such thing as the Jews. There's such a thing as Jews. There's no unified body. For example, there are a lot of very wealthy Jews. You're not speaking to one of them.
Oh, come on now. That looks like a fancy sports car to me. Look at the curvature on that steering wheel. It's covered in fine Corinthian leather. You've got a sunroof. I can see leather seats. You must be Jewish. And you probably own the car lot. You got it at a discount. You charge some poor schmuck, struggling Palestinian 5 times more for his beater so that you could afford the BMW. Am I getting this right?
Where I live here, it's not a BMW, but where I live here in...
Oh, that's a Nazi car. I forgot. Okay, it's a Volvo.
No. My last car was an Audi, but
okay.
Where I live here in beautiful Clifton Passaic, New Jersey, people routinely drive cars that are worth more than their houses. Okay.
Right. Well, that's not hard to do in New Jersey.
Well, no, the houses are actually pretty expensive around here.
Even the ones over the toxic waste dumps, which are about 80% of the state. New Jersey is such a dump. How bad are things in Israel right now? I understand even New Jersey looks good to Jews right now. Is that true?
No, God forbid. Okay. No, it's not true. And
I'm not going to let this one thing slide, though. Norm was about to compliment the girth of your steering wheel. I don't know if you caught it. He said, "Look at the curvature of the." Yeah.
Wow.
It is.
It's a luxury, right?
Look, it's a manly car for a masculine. You know what? I'm going to close the sunroof. Oh no, it's not. The sun is coming in behind my head. I'm going to change the angle a little bit because I think it's ruining the picture. Okay, but I mean, this just happened after I parked here. Seriously though, but there's no such thing as the Jews, and whenever you hear someone talking about the Jews do or any collective thing that the Jews do, it's preposterous. It's ridiculous. Even in our reduced state in the world, even after the Holocaust, even before the Holocaust, we were always a teensy percentage of the world. There is no protocols there's no elders of Zion. There's we don't act as a unitary organization. There are lots of Jews who are prominent in a lot of areas of endeavor. That's because we tend to be successful if we're given any opportunity whatsoever. I mean, my ancestors in Eastern Europe and Central Europe were not, to my knowledge, wealthy people, but they were discriminated against. They were not entitled to, the civil rights that we have in this country or the economic opportunities that we have in this country. But whenever Jews are given the freedom to excel, they do. That's just,
comment on this. I've always thought that was a cultural factor. I mean, the fact is that Jews value. There's no organization Jews.
No. You can say Jews. You can say whatever you want. But saying Jews, yes, the Jews. That's the. For purposes of this conversation, I mean, we can have the meta conversation about God's plan for the Jews. That's a different thing. And we will.
Well, so Jewish culture, as near as I can tell, values education. It's a didactic culture. Even the Talmud, meditation on the Bible, on the Word of God, what objective reality is, what the plan is, the humorous elements of the human condition, an inquiry, a serious engagement with man's nature and destiny. I associate all of this with Jewish culture, and I think there is a thing called Judeo-Christian civilization. That we are beneficiaries of right now. And I can't help but wonder whether anti-Semitism is a form of envy.
Of course it is. And you find anti-Semitism among strongest among those with the most to envy. Now, let's take a step back. There's always been a strain of anti-Semitism, even among the better classes, right? That sort of polite anti-Semitism that you had in Victorian society and that among people who you would think had nothing necessarily to envy, right? Because these upper middle class and ruling class types in Europe and in the United States. I mean, there are a lot of strands to that go into this rope. After all, the impact of old-fashioned Christianity on the view of the Jews was very meaningful through the mid 20th century in most parts of the Western world. But that really visceral eliminationist kind of hatred, as opposed to the the restricted country club kind of stuff, that tends to be from people with something to resent, something to be envious over. Basement dwelling Nazis, people with really no, I mean, there is part of the problem. Listen, once again, unpacking definitions.
Yeah.
What is the Jewish people? Is it a people? Is it a religion? It is unique in the world for having qualities of a religion, in that anyone who becomes a convert to the Jewish faith through, the accepted procedure for doing so is, in every respect, for all practical purposes, a Jew, every bit as much as someone like me, whose 23andMe report comes back with Ashkenazi 99.94%.
And what's the other? What's the 0.06%? Just ornery?
It wasn't anything interesting or exotic. It was like Southern Europe. In other words, somebody.
Sicilian street sweeper out for a toot one night. Yeah.
Anything's possible. But the point here is that there is a, on the other hand, a national aspect to it, and the Jews are a nation that, let's put ethnic and genetic stuff aside, have a shared national experience that, and a history that we have, partially because of the Talmud, which you mentioned. Look how the sun keeps following me.
Well, that's another sign of God's favor. I mean, when God created the world, he said, there's Ron Coleman. Okay, what are we going to do with the rest of the other 6 days? Well, we'll make a mess of things, but we can bring Ron back in the 21st century.
But you should see when I stop it midway in the sky in order to win a battle. I mean, it is awesome. In any event, to some extent, people don't know what they're fighting. People don't know what they're angry about. But they do know that people who've maybe been in, whose families have only been in this country for, 2 or 3 generations. In my case, it's on my mother's. My mother is an immigrant. Is an immigrant. I say she was an immigrant because she immigrated in 1956. Okay, and my father was a 3rd generation, American. But people, we have the cultural aspect of it isn't only education, it's also diligence and hard work, and part of that is because what we find is that if you separate it from the actual religious commitment, which is an all-encompassing commitment. I mean, this morning, the reason I'm doing this from my car is I didn't have time to get home and set up, because I just finished I just left the morning service at the yeshiva here in Passaic, which starts at 7:10 and ends at 8 o'clock. And I have a Talmud study partner from 6:30 to 7:10. And most days of the week, I have another Talmud study partner at 8 o'clock, who is a PhD in finance and a professor. We stay very busy. There's an idea of diligence, and what we find is that, look at all the Jews in all the universities and in the professions. Fascinating how Jews tend to be successful. But what we find is that if they give up the religious commitment after usually 2 or 3 at the most generations, 90% of the time, they cease to have a Jewish identity. They might have a Jewish last name, like Greenwald, or many famous Jewish names that in the intellectual world, but they're no longer identifiably Jewish. So what they're often left with a genetic heritage of high IQ. There does seem to be a correlation between Jewish Ashkenazi heritage in particular and I don't know what's the
I something or other. Oh yeah, IQ. Yeah,
I know most of the letters.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's all this stuff going on, and yes, there's the resentment. But look, there are legitimate.
How do we deal with anti-Semitism right now? Because I'm concerned. I'm looking at what's going on in Israel right now. My view is that what Hamas did was savagery. It's beyond the pale and beyond anything that we should. That now, folks, we've got a view of Ron Coleman's left armpit covered by an expensive suit.
I was hoping I could.
Okay.
I was hoping that shake
we
would
didn't
knock
smell
out
a thing. No,
the
that
sun
worked.
looks fine, Ron. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about the sun. We thought that was your angelic glow. So I mean, once again, demystified. But so I wake up in the morning one day and my wife says there's more conflict in the Middle East, and I'm like, there's always conflict in the Middle East. She says it's serious this time. I read the news and I learned that Hamas has stormed into Israel, killing civilians. And what I learned in the following days is that people were raped, old women and children, and killed and kidnapped. And that now we come to learn some 1,400 civilians were savaged. And from where I come from, Ron, that is an unacceptable response to any situation. And I view Israel as having a right to defend itself. Now,
so hold on. So are you in any way suggesting that these acts were the result of anti-Semitism?
No, it's the reaction. I don't know, Kenneth. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply talking about why we're talking today. Now I see Israel reacting. I see a conflict, and I see people on the streets in the United States blaming Israel for Hamas's savagery. And that strikes me as anti-Semitism. And it's become such a thing. I'm looking at today's newspaper, the New York Times. As public anger rises, Arab states clamor for Gaza ceasefire. Third paragraph, this coming from the Jordanian foreign minister. The whole region is sinking in a sea of hatred that will define generations to come. Where's he been living for the last, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 years? It's always been hostile in the Middle East. I recall I recall reading that when the state of Israel was created in 1948, the Arab nations didn't say, okay, let's create a Palestinian state in the land that remains. The commitment was to drive Israel into the sea. And that struck me as a reflection of anti-Semitism. What's changed? And what's going on in the West now that we're rallying behind Hamas?
Ron, really, from our perspective, you can't really tell.
All right.
Promise.
But I got it. All right. Listen, there's a lot. There's so much in the question. There's the reason Hamas. We there? Oh,
Yep.
there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
So of course it's anti-Semitism. There is this preposterous spiel, as they say in Arabic, that this is all about colonialism. It's a Marxian, template that's used here. This is about colonialism. This is about a resistance to colonialism, to white colonialism. Now, of course, your white supremacists don't consider Jews white. And after all, I mean, one look at me and you definitely see.
No, you're turquoise. You are turquoise. I mean, you may identify as white, but you're objectively turquoise. So just get over it. Yes.
It's about Jews. It's about Jews. There was no rioting when the British controlled Transjordan, or the territories that came to be known as Palestine. No one had a problem. No one had a problem, but they were able to manage. They were able to control themselves. And when Jordan controlled the West Bank until from 48 to 67, no one had a problem with that either. There is in Islam a great deal of resentment towards Jews, a great deal of enmity towards Jews, but there's a great deal in the Arab world of envy towards Jews, because as some of the wise guys, I think, aptly point out, what if the Palestinians in fact, to a large extent, the Arab world, since the Ottoman Empire, which is not Arab, but the Muslim world and the Arab world have really failed to show up on the Nobel Prize rosters. Okay, it has not been a
It's because the Jews control the Nobel Prize. I mean, they're not going to give.
Yeah, right. Of course,
they're not going to give Yasser Arafat recognition for his freedom fighting. You know,
the Swedish Parliament is a Zionist tool. I'm less concerned with. Listen, what's happening in the Middle East is awful, and the whole issue of Zionism is a really complex one, especially for an Orthodox Jew who has my religious perspective. It's problematic. It's we don't have the time or the capacity, and nor am I the best person to get into that. But what is far more concerning in so many ways, because in a way we expect what's happening in the Mideast to happen because it's the Mideast, and it's, as you point out, it's been happening, well before 1948, and well before there were any Jews in power. I mean, when Jews first started buying land for money from Arabs, that in the beginning of the Zionist, the what's called the first Aliyah, the first immigration of Jews to in modern times, in the late 19th century, that caused rioting. Jews were buying land. That caused rioting. Why? Why? What is it? Okay, not getting into that. Believe it or not, after all that, I'm saying I'm not getting into that. What we do have to worry about, what is the concern of the three of us and the other three people listening to us.
My mother's dead. There are only two.
is what's happening in this country, and to some extent in the West, in Europe. The universities, I'm not too concerned really about the workplace. I don't think there's really much going on in the streets, notwithstanding the fear mongering that some people are interested in. I do think, though, that when you look at the universities and their fruit, the young people who are 30 and under, who are the product of American higher education over the last generation.
The lost generation.
It is truly a lost generation. I mean, they overwhelmingly support the actions of Hamas in committing mass murder, rape, like every crime against
humanity. And that's what's terrifying to me, because what they're saying is there's some ideology that says savagery in support of our goals is fine. And so the Jews are first, they're a convenient scapegoat. Who's next? And what do we do as ordinary people, especially non-Jews, to say, hey, look, I'm not game with this. This is a bullshit piece of rhetoric. And, what's the most effective way of striking back? I say I'm a proud Western chauvinist. I believe in a Judeo-Christian tradition. I believe in the values of Western civilization. I believe in the laws of just war, for example.
Of course. And really, everyone does also, unless it involves the Jews. Everyone.
Yeah.
It isn't really a serious... I mean, and this is something, by the way, that the United Kingdom seems to have a real dominant role on. There are so many prominent people in England who are absolutely... their hypocrisy on issues of war crimes and is just mind-boggling. But we certainly have it here as well. I want to just take a step and again take a step back. Jews are always the scapegoat, and who's going to be next? It doesn't matter who's going to be next. The famous, they came for the Jews and I didn't protest because I was, and then they came for me. You didn't have to. In other words, the suggestion of that little poem is that if they hadn't come for you, it would have been okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to victimize any group for, I mean, listen, people can have their preferences. You can even have your hatred. It's a free country. There are lots of people I don't like. I don't tend to really have a lot of animus towards groups as such because it's a waste of my time. But I have to treat everyone decently. Violence is out of the question. And we live in a pluralistic society and everyone ought to have the same civil rights. But the real point of what you said is there's an ideological justification for butchery. And that is literally what happened. It's in World War II. And there have always been human rights violations and wars of the wars of law, the laws of war have, there have been massacres all over the world, and the Turks and the Armenians. This is not new, but the ideological justification for mass murder and dehumanization that the Nazis brought to an extraordinarily high level. And when I say high, I mean in terms of sophistication and
right.
And dust and
practical efficacy. Yeah.
Right. That's where we're heading now. And the amazing thing is, it's bad enough that these students are so misled, but that the leading universities are afraid to get their own campuses roiled up any further and won't join in. Suddenly they're very big on free speech. These colleges where where they have these.
You can't pick on a transgender person, but if you say something anti-Semitic, we'll defend your right to speak. Right.
Now it's free speech. And here's what you brought me on for. Here's the part that I'm gonna get people angry over. The leadership in many of these schools is Jews. Or people with Jewish last names, which is not necessarily the same. But Jews have been extremely successful in academia. Okay, again, that inherited intellectual bent and the cultural orientation towards scholarship. Jews, in their belief that Nazism and so-called fascism were the result of are a sort of inverse of liberalism and the antithesis of tolerance, have developed a culture in which tolerance is essentially the only first principle. And that means you tolerate even the intolerant. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that.
No, I get that. Yeah, right.
We're seeing the fruits of that now because they cannot put the genie back in the bottle. And they also can't say, what a man would say. When I say a man in the sense of a mensch, could be, it doesn't matter what the gender is. But if you're a college president and you see these kind of things happening on your campus, you say, you know what? I'm going to tell you something. I'm Jewish, and this is bullshit. I'm not putting up with this anymore. I'm going to stop hiding behind ideological justifications and political slogans. This is personal to me, and just as you would take it personally if it were you, we're not going to put up with it. And it's what they won't do, these assimilated Jews in these positions of authority, is say that, because that would remind the world of something that they're trying to make the world forget, which is that they're Jews.
Yeah, and so it's a form of internalized anti-Semitism, trying to pass as what they're not, as opposed to accepting what they are. So, you know, Ron, I'm on a mission. I've been reading through the Old Testament, one chapter, one book at a time. And, you know, I got to the end of Exodus and, you know, the construction of the temple and the mercy seat and the ark. And I'm like, man, my eyes are rolling over. And then I got to that at the end of the section. And I said, and then I realized the point was simply obedience to God, as God has commanded. They built this as God has commanded. They built this as God has commanded. And I think as I understand Judaism somewhat, and you know, how spiritually impoverished am I, Ron? When I grew up, I grew up in circumstances in which I was so deracinated, I wanted to be Jewish, right? You know, and so I read through Exodus with a sense of envy, and that's me speaking. With a sense of envy that here were people who felt that the call of the divine, and the response was one of obedience. Now, clearly, the history is one of obedience, recalcitrance, rebuke, suffering, redemption, refining, righteousness. I get all that, but those used to be things that everyone could talk about. And now we've lost a sense of the divine. We've lost a sense of righteousness. We've lost a sense of the value of repentance. And we've replaced it all with entitlement. And as Mike would point out, we live in a flat world where everything is possible. And now we've got, you know, Jewish people who with Jewish heritages as heads of institutions afraid to embrace their own heritage for fear of what exactly? For fear that they'd be thought less of? How can you think less of anyone in this world and than we do right now when we see it coming off its hinges? What's the call? I, the quasi-Christian, the person who believes in St. Augustine, is going to ask you the question that was asked, I think, of Jesus, Mr. Orthodox Jew. What must we do to be saved? How do we recover our wits and our sense of civility and our civilization in the face of growing anti-Semitism? Because I'll go so far as to say that as anti-Semitism goes, as it flourishes, so declines the value of the civilization in which we live. And I will not abide that without a fight. How do we effectively fight it?
Yeah, well, I don't really have that answer.
Well, then what the hell are you doing here?
But I do have a spiel. I have a spiel. First of all, you mentioned something before, which we really have to wrestle with, and it's something I discussed with Michael Knowles a couple times. Judeo-Christian. What do we do about? And we discussed it in the context of paganism, actually. When do we say that this tolerance, this holy value, does not include, again, toleration of intolerance? Paganism is antithetical to the tolerance of religion. You might say, well, that's crazy. And in fact, in ancient times, the pagans maintained that Jews and Christians were the ones who were haters of humanity, because they, as pagans, believed that, listen, whatever floats your boat, you know. But the fact of the matter is that paganism, at the end of the day, is a rejection of God. It's a rejection of God in favor of magic tricks, and it is not consistent with the Judeo-Christian ethic.
It's love of the wrong things, love of the creature rather than the creator.
Now, what do we do right? Now, what do we do with Islam? Islam is constitutionally entitled to every right that every other faith is entitled to. But culturally speaking, we have to acknowledge it's different. It's different. And I don't know the answer to how we deal with that, other than to say the First Amendment and the Constitution and the entire Republic and the civilization that have accreted around those things, is premised on ordered liberty. And toleration of violence is absolutely unacceptable. And we can't even begin to have the discussion about a cultural readjustment, about fixing our culture, unless and until everyone says that everyone has to behave. And there has been an utter surrender to lawlessness. And this is not only a religious thing. This whole idea of shutting down freeways and police, coordinating with protesters in order to and like the whole thing that happened the summer of love, and BLM, and when Trump was inaugurated, the left's decision to buy short-term goodwill by accepting violence as a form of political, as a form of political engagement,
speech, really.
Right. They have made it as a form of speech. It is the signal disaster of the last, I would really say 10 years, because you had riots in the 60s, right? And they were acknowledged to be riots, and at least in those, for all the negativity that resulted, you did have resistance to rioting. You did have the police, you did have the National Guard, and there was at least an idea that, okay, we might not have dealt with things so great at Kent State, but we were trying to deal with things. We were trying to maintain a civilized regime. We're not even trying that. And when you then take the prosecutions of January 6th.
Oh, don't get me going on that.
Right? A wide-ranging political police operation against political opposition to criminalize actual speech, and then juxtapose it with the acceptance of the BLM violence, the acceptance of the Trump riots. You have sent a message to your society that violence is absolutely legitimate when we say it is, and that's the only criterion for violence. And hand in hand with that is these, the no bail nonsense and the soft on crime business. We're sending a message that violence and anarchy are political tools. So one thing you won't hear me say is that Muslims are stupid. They're reading the tea leaves and they're saying, we've got a green light. I don't say Muslims, but extremists. It doesn't take a lot of people to make a very impressive show of strength. How many arrests were there in connection with that riot outside the White House?
The other night? One.
Yeah.
One is reported in the New York Times several days ago. Okay. There may have been a few since, but none. Yeah.
Okay. Give me a break.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
A break. You'd have to be an absolute idiot if you're interested in destabilizing a society or in moving the Overton window in terms of what you and your friends are going to be allowed to do and what the rules are going to be, not to take a message from that it's good for you, it's not good for Republicans. And yeah, anti-Semitism is merely the leading tip. And I'm not saying because other people then are going to be victims, but because it is a force around which violent thugs like to organize, and because the resentment fuel is there, and all the things. But what we're really talking about here is the unraveling of an entire civilization, and there's no shame.
So,
Ron, go ahead, Mike.
I talk a lot on this stream with Norm about the role of social media in that unraveling. right? And it feels very much to me, because I'm 33 years old. I remember an analog era, but I was on that bridge from analog into digital, right? I was on that bridge from, sending my father pages, right? From my home phone, from my corded phone. But also now, my son will not understand a time that I would describe in such a manner, right? Which means to me that the medium of exchange has completely shifted. And the issue with big tech and social media is necessarily that what you described there about the lessening of accountability, the lessening of enforcement of existing criminal code, is that it's almost merely a content generation tool to seize ordinary people of their willingness to apply resistance in the real world, because there's images right in their pocket of the consequence of doing so, right? Seeing somebody get beat in the head with a megaphone, right? These images, so these incidents are far less frequent than this pocket mirror we all have would lead us to believe. That is, there are 350 million Americans, and these incidents that scroll through our timeline represent, in my opinion, a really disproportionate mind share of what goes on in day-to-day life. There is a overwhelming majority of people in this country that are perfectly willing to go about their life in a civil way. They have much to guard. They have their obligations. They need to pay their taxes. They need to pay their mortgage. They need to make sure.
And hence the result of the polls showing Trump ahead in 5 of the 6 swing states. I think ordinary people are watching this shit show and saying enough. How do we find one another and respond?
My point here, though, with respect to the to anti-Semitism, is that it feels very much like a deployable channel through this broader social media spectrum, through
Very
which
nice
to
point.
capture mind share that has not been activated in a while. It's like, hey, we need to dust off the anti-Semitism stuff because we're talking too much about immigrants at the southern border, or we're talking too much about taxpayer money being funded into Eastern Europe to finance a war that nobody likes, or we're financing too much of this existing administration that doesn't seem to have any bearing as to the cost of what it's doing to polite society, right? That's causing fractures within the 10th Amendment and federalism, right? It just, I said early on to Norm that I don't feel equipped to opine or to say anything intelligent as to the history of the Middle East, anything to do with Judaism versus Islam, or how that conflict in the Middle East with Hamas is transpiring and evolving. But what I do know is that young people are attracted to social media, and that young people are attracted to TikTok, and that TikTok is not a nationalized, that's not a national company, right? That is a foreign adversaries company here, with a black box of algorithms that are deployable at will by a foreign adversary, right? A huge trade partner, but ultimately the source of the fentanyl, right? And approximately the deaths of despair that Norm talks about. To me, we're not demanding enough of our young people because we haven't conquered social media. We can't demand anything more individually of our young people. We can't ask them questions about themselves because they have been trained to look out and to internalize collective conflict as part of their identity by virtue of their participation in this broader, scrolling, infinite, vague conversation that is like the haves and the have-nots, right? Bravo TV shows us opulence, material opulence, with unimpressive people, right? Unimpressive people wielding mountains of wealth that they have no capacity to earn from scratch, right? And young people are being trained that this is the way of the world. What do we do? That to me is the broader question, and why I say to Norm that this is such a complex issue, in my opinion, because abortion was the leading indicator in the elections last night. And what I know is that fundamentalist Islam and fundamentalist Orthodox Judaism align on the family unit being sacred, right? Many Christians do as well. There is not a pro-choice stance in the Orthodox religious sensibility on either side. So there is an alignment there. Somehow, though, our academia is churning out students that are sympathetic to the plight of a certain group of people to the exclusion of the other, right? While
Okay, so
in voting for something that fundamentally neither side even wants within society.
well, that's right. I mean, and look, the alignment. There's so much in what you said that is entitled to discussion. The alignment of Islamic political power in this country with the far left is preposterous, and it's amazing how both sides continue to lie about it. But you can only understand it as as they both have a common enemy, which is the existing order, to which in no insignificant measure, Jews have a very, very deep investment. The Jews have benefited from pluralism, have benefited from meritocracy. And these are things, I mean, meritocracy is the antithesis of DEI.
And that's what I mean about demanding more of our young people, right? Is that they are being wedded to this notion of diffusing personal responsibility. And too few of us know what it means to strive and achieve.
You're 100% right. And in fact, the culture that my children have grown up in is one of diligence and achievement. And we see around us how unique that makes them. There's a lot going on in what you said, and social media has been poisoned, although I'm very reluctant to accept the idea that this is part of a plot. I wasn't saying that you said it was, but that the Chinese Communist Party has sort of planned out this subversive program. I don't really think that that's I don't say it's impossible. I think that we're actually seeing real psychological and social psychological and cultural phenomena bubble through the gate that's been opened by this technology. But I will say, as a simple and arguably simplistic response to the original question, if we will go back to, at the very least, refusing to tolerate lawlessness and incivility and violence, we will begin. That's the beginning of civilization.
All right. And that's a great place to end here for Ron. We've kept you longer than we promised. I'm sorry. I see you glancing down at the clock. I am too. Ron Coleman, will you come back and join us again sometime? Because this is a discussion. This is a discussion that we need to continue. And I think Ron nailed it at the end, and I'm trying to rescue him, because we could talk this to death, and maybe should, but we can't do it on your time, and we can't do it today. Do not tolerate lawlessness. Do not tolerate violence. If you see something, say something. And stand tall for the values that you represent and that reflect the best within you.
Please, you got to stand up. You've got to stand up. People have got to, and they've got to sign their name on it.
I was relieved yesterday. I was in Congress to try to influence events in favor of humane treatment of the Proud Boys and others being held in federal penitentiaries. And I was relieved to see a number of placards in the halls of Congress. I stand with Israel. You won't see that on national news, but there is a silent majority in the United States who believes in decency, who believes in civility, who believes in treating one another with respect. Be that person today. Don't stand back. Don't be intimidated. Help make a better world with your individual acts of civility. Shake a hand. Say no when you see something unacceptable. Create the groundswell that will create change. This is Norm Pattis. Thanks, Ron Coleman. Thanks, Mike Boyer. Mike, how do people find us here on Law and Legitimacy?
Follow at LawPod Daily on X. We're live there every day, as we are on Rumble and YouTube. You can also find us after the fact, audio only, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, wherever you find premium intellectual podcasts. Ron, people can find you at Ron Coleman on X. There's roncoleman.com. You are, of course, a partner at Dillon Law Group. Where else? What else do I need to plug? Coleman Nation is the podcast, and
Yeah.
I'll put some information in the description.
Yeah, it's a not. Believe me, you'll find me if anyone who is interested in that at all. Find me on X and the rest.
And do find Ron Coleman, folks. He is a national treasure. Ron, stay safe. These are scary times.
Thanks.
Love
too.
you, buddy.
See ya.
Thank you for joining us today.
Catch you
You
later.
guys have a great day. See you later.